I would like to thank you for joining the second of our global seminars on how to innovate to a people-centered data economy. As we have shared in the previous meeting and in communications, the structure of our seminar series is two-part. The first one is that includes people talking about policy issues or research issues relevant to the area. And then the second one is practitioners, people from the business and nonprofit and other sectors talking about how the day-to-day stuff they do to make the sort of vision we have can become a reality. And today's seminar is with the CEO of Sphere, a leading company in Europe and one of our great champions, I think, for what they've been able to achieve. I'll do some introductions in that shortly, but Sphere is a winner of a prize process run by one of our nonprofit partners, My Data Global. And to introduce My Data Global and the process that they follow in their awards, I'd like to welcome Christopher Wilson, who's the Executive Director. He's actually in Brussels today.
Hello, my name is Christopher Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of My Data Global. I'm sorry that I can't be with you today. I'm currently in the European Parliament with our board chair, Eric Cole, where we are speaking with MEPs about some of the issues that we'll be discussing in this webinar today. So thank you for allowing me to send a quick recording. I would like to just quickly introduce My Data. We are a global membership association dedicated to giving people control over their data. We believe that this creates real life benefits for people when they have access to and the ability to understand and use data about their health, their mobility, their skills. And it also creates opportunities for competition and innovation when businesses can deliver human-centric services driven by people on the basis of data portability and interoperability. It also creates value for society. This is what we're all about. This is especially important now because we are creating so much data through all of our activities online and offline, and even data that is not strictly categorized as personal data has deeply personal consequences and potential if people can access it and use it for their benefit. So we work towards this goal as a global community. We've members all over the world. Those are individuals, including privacy professionals and researchers and intellectuals and activists, but also organizations, including digital agencies and cities and libraries, large global corporations, but also small startups and SMEs that are trying to build solutions and services in the marketplace to demonstrate that a better way is possible. Our community also has a number of thematic groups that work to develop white papers and infrastructure and governance frameworks, standards, reference architectures, and we have thematic groups working on issues as diverse as children's data, health data, other issues as well. An important part of what we do also involves showcasing what works. We try to showcase best practice to help our members identify and to share business models that are sustainable, but also put people first. And we promote the My Data Awards, about which I'll speak in a moment. Our members are from all around the world, and these are some of the organizations that I mentioned earlier. A core part of what many of our members and businesses in particular do is based on the operator model for personal data intermediation, which was first elaborated in this white paper thumbnailed here in 2020. That model and the reference architecture that accompanied it has been elaborated since across different sectors, different countries, different types of services, and increasingly has been adapted to complex data ecosystems that we see now emerging around the world. Since 2020, we have awarded operator status to 22 different data intermediaries across multiple countries and sectors with varying types of activities. Fair, we are proud to say, is one of those. The most recent edition of the My Data Awards, issued last year, pivoted away from data intermediation exclusively to focus on 4 different categories and highlight meaningful contributions to business, technology, governance, and thought leadership. Now, these awards were made on the basis of 400 nominations, and we ended up awarding 80 awards to individuals and organizations across all 4 categories and across the world. Again, Fair was one of these, and we're proud to have them included. This overlaps, but is distinct from how data intermediation is regulated in the European context. It's worth noting that the Data Governance Act mandated a certification regime for data intermediation service providers, which were required to register and be certified in the countries from which they operate. After 2 years of being in force, the DGAA has seen 28 intermediaries registered as such, predominantly in France and Netherlands, where Fair is one of these. We note that there's a simplification proposal in the recent omnibus that was published by the Commission last month, which suggests that this regime will be replaced by a voluntary certification scheme. There's lots of open questions about what that will look like. But what we do know now, as things continue to evolve, is that the trustworthiness that comes with putting people first in the type of business model and operational model that Fair is promoting, that matters now more than ever. It has the potential to strengthen customer engagement and brand loyalty, but also to strengthen general systems trust in the data ecosystems that are emerging, to strengthen digital citizen engagement for public authorities, and perhaps most importantly, to signal best practices to the market. Apologize about background noise. So with this, I'd just like to say that Fair stands in very good company as a longstanding member of the MyData community, as one of the original MyData operators, as a MyData awardee, and as one of the certified data intermediaries under the DGA legislation. And we are very happy to be learning more about your work today. Thank you from me. I wish you an excellent webinar, and I look forward to hearing more about what you discuss.
Thank you to Krista for that. The My Data Global, one of the 3 nonprofits working with Guide in bringing the seminar series, the other one being Global Solutions Initiative, mostly based out of Berlin, and the Center for National Governance Innovation out of Canada. And specifically, I think the links with practitioners and businesses is particularly valuable. Christopher's already introduced Fair to a degree, but I'd like now to introduce Ferdinand Burgersdijk, who is the CEO of Fair, and has a sort of fascinating story to tell about how do you actually take this stuff which is talked about in theory and actually build something that's real and practical and make some money and actually keeps people employed and helps people. And I have a lot of respect for people who go and do that. And we're going to ask Ferdinand if he'll introduce the organization, introduce what they're doing, and then we'll probably move to a conversation about what are the challenges, what makes it easy, what makes it hard, and open it up for questions. So Ferdinand, welcome, and pass it to you.
Thanks, Paul. It's a great pleasure to be here. First of all, thank you for your invitation and all the organizations you represent, and of course, the friends at MyData Global. Yeah, how do you get to a place like this? This is always a good question. And it has been, for me, it has been a journey from multiple sides of the table, so to say. When I finished my MBA about a decade ago, I was all focused on creating efficiency in the domain of actually organizational, so work. So people having a position currently within a organization based upon a structure, because that's the easiest way to organize people in a sort of hierarchical military governance way. And that never sat right with me somehow. So my MBA actually challenged the MBA, because this is a concrete mill for such an organization structure, where I said, let's look at people themselves and look at the competences that they have and the activities that they employ during their role as being representative of a business. I'll just start a presentation shortly, but also explaining that the story continued when we started mapping the efficiency model and the activity model on mobility. So public transport, but also shared mobility, on-demand mobility, because these different networks of modalities actually support all the mobility that we require, but they fall short because they are self-focused. And instead of allowing them to interact openly with one another, they are siloed based usually on the data principles, because somewhere along the line, they started to digitize their business or administrative processes and ended up in different platforms with different architectures, different technologies. And at the crosshairs of this, you will find, and this is also what I will explain, that the process of the passenger that wants to enjoy public transport or shared mobility is actually quite the same, whether it's a bus, a tram, or an e-scooter. The issue is that these systems do not correlate or do not communicate amongst each other due to lock-ins, which I will address, and also due to the fact that interoperability is lacking. So my goal was to leverage a compliance such as GDPR and data governance in order to allow these systems to collaborate, to be interoperable, and also to be human-centric. Why? Because there's a lot of value in these systems, and we need to make sure that we get that out of there, because we are looking at public transport in a public space with a lot of public funding, and the networks need to be accessible, they need to be easy to use, need to include ridership instead of excluding them through digital means. One of those things is the economy of it, and that means that if we can align these different networks in a decent fashion, then we have an attractive whole of services which can actually compete with the convenience of the, single person occupancy car. And that's the whole thing. So how can we, as a community of PTAs, public transport authorities, PTOs, so the operators, be able to service individuals better? And also placing that at the helm. And you will see along the way of the presentation that it's not just for the mobility market, because we're looking at transactions, and transactions take place in any market. So I'll share my screen after this intro, and then I hope that we can get everything up and running. Let's see if you've got this. I hope so. And then I'll continue to share. Good. So welcome in my world, the world of FAIR. And the smallest building blocks are activities that are taking place in the context of a process. So any agent, which could be a digital platform, which could be an individual, which could be any individual actually, that is competent to fulfill the activities designated output from the minimally required input, is eligible to do. So that means that no matter the rank or position in life, if you are able to execute something to a certain dedicated outcome, then you should be able to do that. This is why a lot of people can use similar tools to actually process texts and everything. So what we looked at was the supply chain concept of just in time. And that
Ferdinand, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Ambassador Sente can help me with this, but at the moment on my screen, I can see the same FAIR opening page.
Yeah,
is that migrating?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no worries, Paul. You're on the right page.
I'm on the right page? Okay, my apologies.
Yeah, I can switch it in a bit, but this is where it starts, because I'm trying to take you along in the world of the supply chain concept of just in time, the concept that we took to reduce the buffer of information that you require in your on-premise setting. So like the production process of cars, the bodies arrive to the suppliers at the latest stage possible, not to overcrowd the yard. And if you keep that in mind, you should always question how much of someone's or anyone's information should you require on premise whilst doing the service activities of data processing. FAIR is a very simple application, a bit abstract though. It merely facilitates the communication between these specified agents on behalf of data rights holders, aligning them to interact only when required, authorizing access to information in the context of the activity at hand. So hopefully now you'll see that, let's see. Good. Now you hopefully saw a shift in the screen. Paul, yeah, good. I see you nodding. So in a platform, we usually see two-sided marketplaces, which are actually organized unilaterally. So from the perspective of the platform owner. So the platform designs the scope and the interactions for both the user and the vendor within its own confines, so within its own setting. Instead of catering to the transaction between the user and the vendor, it started to own it. So this centralized role in the fulfillment should have led to early questions such as, how can one be trusted party of two transacting parties, right? So it's logical if I only have one bank in the world, and that means that we're all clients to that bank. But it should also be possible to choose my own bank, which I can actually do, and have that bank execute payments or receive funds on my behalf. So if we take another step, we see that this user and this vendor are actually locked into the two-sided marketplace. And this is a platform strategy. And the platform strategy is to become omnipotent and omniscient and designed to reduce the interaction of the individual to that of a user, dependent of the offer, and that of the vendor to incur dependence for their digital presence and sales channels. In the meantime, they have a monopoly of data on top of this, allowing them to outsmart any of the vendors. Look, for instance, at a model like that of Amazon. So in the world of public transport, we usually talk about transport operators. And so this is not a my data operator. This is an operator like a bus operator or a train operator or a tram operator. And once we started our quest in the world of mobility and mobility as a service, the issues around multimodal and cross-border ticketing arose, one of which is related to the business-to-business interaction between platforms and operators. So most of these platforms want to be the spider in the web, creating their own logic, their own frameworks, to which the operators must obey, let's say that. While these organizations focus on the everyday business of transporting people safely, they were simply happy that they had found anyone or any organization that could provide those digital services. So the third-party engagement is sound if they are interchangeable, but in most cases, they lack interoperability, they lack transparency, and they create a state of dependence. So what the data regulation in Europe says, and it actually comes to the aid, they are servicing or they are fostering neutrality, transparency, and accountability under utility services of the Data Governance Act. So this transforms the relationship based on dependence into one of delegation. The platform holding the data on behalf of the operator actually requires the consent to use this data only for the data processing activities, and such consent can only be given when the operator is aware of the goal, the process, and the data required to get to the designated output. So this also allows separation of the role of the data holder and that of the data service provider and that of the data rights holder. This means an operator can choose what to share and what not to share, foreseeable and accountable with anyone, delegated through their agents of choice, what is known as a fiduciary role, not unlike we see in banking, the example I just gave. And on the other side of the two-sided marketplace of ticketing, we see the user, usually reduced to merely a token tied to a long-lasting account, its actions being carefully monitored to reconstruct the audit trail of consumption of the service, or entitlement as it's called in ticketing, and the audit trail of the payment, which could be prepaid, postpaid, or a mix as pay-as-you-go. The latter promotes an insurance of payment after the conclusion of a consumption. In reality, the user is an individual in a specific role, a name for the context in which it acts. In public transport, most often referred to as a passenger, and in payment, a customer. But this could differ on the context, so it could also be a patient, a student, a customer, or a citizen. So, though in the context and relevant to the need to know basis, consent for establishing such an identity is required. That consent, similar like we just expressed of the operator to the platform, is limited to the activities of validation of the entitlement and inspection thereof in the context of the execution of the service, and the same goes for the payment activities in the context of the customer. So the Fair's Fair protocol limits the use of that information by independently communicating the state of play to the specified and authorized delegated agents. This means these can be different actors for the service activities and the payment activities. By linking the different transactional activities to the transaction over the specified delegated agents, which still can be one and the same provider, right? So you can also create this model within existing platforms, opening them up towards the outside and making them compliant. The state of completed activities are enough in most cases, right? Certainly when the delegated agent that communicates the fulfilled activity amongst their trusted peers, right? If it's a trusted party, one can simply say this person in this activity is solvable, either through a piggy bank, a closed loop, or an open loop debit or credit card. And they can use any means of validation from to the barcodes to self-actions such as swipe in, swipe out, geolocation, Bluetooth, even facial recognition. Paradoxical as it may sound, allowing an individual to travel anonymously towards third parties. The audit trail of the service, origin, destination, and that of the payment flow back to both the operator and the passenger via their agents. This means that all the need to know information gets to those that need to know. Seeing fair is fair in itself is not authorized to access this information. It relieves the information centricity that regular platforms entertain. Circling back to the start of the presentation with the spider in the web, authorities in the execution of their public task can request such information for safety and alignment purposes, either for compensation, on concession, or altruist via their citizens. Oh, sorry about that. Good. As set out in the Data Governance Act and the GDPR, Fair is Fair places the digital governance in the hands of humans, either acting on their own behalf or that of an organization, business, or government. By merely selecting data, those such as specified in catalogs, with example, the EU deploy EMDS, DCAT APs, and coherent with standards such as Transmodel and Siri within the domain of mobility, this information in the context of a transaction assumes value. The protocol transcends APIs, architectural differences, allowing dedicated information to be shared between any party despite technological barriers. And seeing the nature of transactions in offer and acceptance, even legal or geographical barriers are overcome. So Fair is Fair is stressing human-centric digital empowerment by fostering a fair data and digital economy, leveraging legal principles to enable individuals, businesses, and authorities to easily manage data, catering to the outcomes that they want, while neither compromising on privacy nor on convenience. So that's it for this presentation. I hope that leaves you with a lot of questions, of course. And if anyone wants to contact me, these are the details that they can use.
Thanks, Ferdinand. That's fantastic. Really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I might start the questions if you don't mind, and then we'll see perhaps the sort of illustrations. You've illustrated the relationship between a citizen participant in the mobility market and an operator. But how does it work with multiple operators and multiple service providers? So how does the interchange work between not just one bus company, but the bike company, and et cetera?
Yeah. So then you are combining different modes into one trip, let's say, and that means that different relationships start to occur. So each transaction between the individual or the passenger with, let's say, first a bus ride, then a train ride, and then a taxi ride would be 3 different transactions. So 3 different relations in which, and this is similar to real life, right? If I enter the bus, I actually, in the past, started a relationship with the bus driver. And when I entered the train, with the train driver and the conductor buying the ticket and getting on, and with the taxi driver, with him or her, of course. And this interaction means that my identity was only temporary, which is a philosophical correct aspect, right? So only in the interaction should I be identifiable. And then we entered into the world of digital money, right, where we saw that people could use the same credit card or debit card or maybe even closed loop piggy bank in order to pay for that. In the back end of platforms, this was integrated into a logical whole for the architects and the development team, but for the outside world, it wasn't. And these are the issues that are occurring in our platforms. So what we simply said is, let's go back to the transactional state of transferring money, value, right, for the service or the entitlement. And also thanks to the word entitlement, and sometimes life is easy because I never planned to be a data intermediation service. We were actually looking at tickets, but an entitlement is a right to have access to something. And you can also do the same to data. So if I can have the right to access a certain data set for a certain use case, then it becomes an entitlement temporary for a certain outcome. And this also includes the economical aspects of things, because then it means that based upon my consent just for that transaction or for that activity, the data that I share has value in order to come to an outcome. And then you can see that if all people get to this mindset, and all the people are the ones that actually are the wind in the mills of the digital economy, otherwise it wouldn't be making sense, we would actually see that the value comes from individuals and not from the platform accumulating the information itself. So for me, this is where human centricity starts, but also a digital economy starts. And when you ask me questions, so when is it going to start, is when we start to prove that we can actually contribute value to the life of the individual based upon the information that they choose to share in a certain circumstance. And one of those I just mentioned is the fact that, for instance, safety or better alignment of the different networks or the different modes in a transport network, which is a huge economic leverage, right? Let's be honest, because a lot of buses and trains or trams are running empty seats all day, certainly in off-peak hours. If we can manage that better between the different networks and not being too much concerned about the competition elements because they're all under public service obligations, right? So from an authority point of view, you should be able to manage that, but the economy behind that is huge. So you can go into, yes, you have to address union contracts and issues like that, but we must envision that we can come to a certain new reality which allows us to reallocate the budget in a more sensible fashion thanks to data. And this is where I think, yes, sorry.
And just from a more simple perspective from my side, you talk about people getting the entitlement, and the entitlement expires. So this is not a continuous entitlement. Does the data expire at the same time the entitlement expires?
Yes. So this independent, we call it a transaction broker. It means that in every interaction digitally, you have 4 stages. 1 is service related, or 2 are service related, 2 are payment related. So you need to identify the individual or the organization that is entitled to actually access the service or the data. And you need to identify the organization which fulfill the obligation to pay for the service or the data. So that means that these 4 different activities have a similar output, right? Whether you're going to see the doctor, whether you're going to get a sandwich, or whether you're going to get on a bus.
Okay.
And this is what, so in our vision, our lives are constituted through a number of transactions that we're in.
So instead of being this sort of setting up a business where it's all customer related, so-called customer related, of which the subset is the actual range of transactions, this is an activity which is just multiple transactions initiated, how to put it, prepared for by the various modes of transport providers, but actually initiated by the consumer or by the citizen.
It's a supermarket. You toss the items in your basket, and at the end, you pay for them, whilst the ownership of the bottle of ketchup or pizza or the package of milk, the ownership is actually still legally with the producer and not with the supermarket. And this is a concept that you need to understand. And the same goes for anything. So you can sell a bus ticket, but as long as it's not consumed, right, or not validated, it's still hanging out there somewhere. Still, the right is still owned by the bus company, whilst the money is in the pockets of the supermarket.
I was going to say, sitting here in Sydney in Australia, I have a card for the local public transport.
Yeah.
And one of the things it does, much to my annoyance, is that it regularly updates itself off my credit card. And so some variation of the state government sits on a big pool of my money for a period of time, or lots of people's money for a period of time. They expect how they make their money.
Yeah.
And it's a continuous thing.
Yep.
It is never ending. So if that's the business economics for those sort of models, how does the business economics work for your model?
So we simply manage the transactions, and our business model is one of the long run, right? We perceive ourselves as a utility, right? The same as we need networks for water and energy. So we don't actually foster the data network, but we foster the transactions, similar as you used to have a ticker for your energy meter, right? So you have a certain payload on your phone or anything that you need to pay for. So our model is in the great numbers. And this is also, we could only do that because we're focusing on the ticketing industry, all right? And for instance, a market like the Netherlands has about, let's say, between 4 and 6 million transactions each day. So that means that with those numbers, you can actually envision a certain revenue, which you can leverage towards the future. And we are mainly focusing on the whole European, or at least the Western European ticketing market. And then you're talking about hundreds of millions of transactions a day. And that means that you can keep the price of the transaction really low. I think we can actually do the same for the transactions, the payment transactions of that, a credit card or closed loop piggy bank that you have in Australia, because going through single bank transactions is far more expensive. So a single bank transaction in itself costs about 16 cents from a cost perspective. Whilst actually, when you look at the digital interaction at a large scale, you could go to under 1 cent, right? So I think we can actually reduce the price of ticketing enormously. Then the question arises, but if I want to be a reseller or a service platform that wants to offer all these different services to an individual, what's my business model? But I don't think that the business model should be in reselling someone's ticket, right? Because you're not putting in that effort. You're adding another layer of value to it, because I simply have one interaction framework, an application or anything else that simply offers me the insights, the information, the booking facilities, all these aspects. So if that would save me a lot of time each month, I would be really eager to pay for that when it saved me time and money.
Okay. And I flagged to people who are online. We've got quite a group of people online. If you've got questions, you'd like to ask questions, please put your hands up and let's do that. I noticed that Dennis Noah, my co-chair, has his hand up straight away, which is the nature of Dennis. So why don't we turn to Dennis and let's see if anybody else has got the hand up after that.
I understand that you're focused on public services where competition is not an issue. But if you're expanding into other markets, then interoperability and competition between service providers will become important. And therefore, do you have any vision about the provision of information to customers of alternative service providers so that the interoperability can really gain traction in your model?
Yep. So thank you for that, Dennis. For me, it's still about managing the identity of, let's go to the retail market, right, of consumption of, let's say, consumer goods like telephones, right? We just buy boxes. We don't get the explanation anymore. We find out on all the different components or the quality of the product online, right? And then we buy the box, right? And then we simply go to the internet, go get me the cheapest box, right? And we're happy to go. So the value is not in the product anymore, right? the whole internet and the information market for me is a it's a buy role, right? It's not, you're not the protagonist, you're not the antagonist, it's a support role. And this is what information does. So I look at information management, not at information technology. Information technology is a strategy. And certainly when you're selling a platform, it's a strategy, because once you get on there, they start pushing cookies along your way, which you should reject. Then they ask you to monitor the statistics of your clicks. So everything's being monitored. You're being monetized. And this is weird because I'm doing the clicks. You just provided a platform and you're leading me in a certain direction. So why am I so interested in these topics, and why do I easily explain to people why I get up in the morning, and so does my staff, the organizations that I work for, with, is the fact that we are giving people back the control over their lives, right? You don't own my clicks. You can pay for my clicks, right? You can thank me for using your platform. So it's the better understanding of humankind. And I like the public transport environment because we are focusing on ecological, economical, societal benefits. So that is really close to my heart. But also look at how, for instance, through social media, political agendas are being pushed. Do we still have the freedom of choice when we're standing to push our ballot into the box or to give our vote? No, we don't, because as long as I'm going to send you messages in a certain direction, in the end, your mind is going to succumb. You're going to be focused on those messages. And this is a philosophical, but also psychological aspect that we're completely missing. So we gave away so much to the platforms. And now we're looking in Europe, for instance, to the digital omnibus, reducing rights of individuals, which is silly because we're saying that it's for SMEs. SMEs most often do not work with big platforms. They really don't. They don't understand them. It takes too much of time. So they rather work in an Excel sheet, right? Usually printed out and entered with crayon and an eraser on the side, right? And I'm not talking about small SMEs, right? Cargo planes are actually filled in that sense, or personnel of big companies still simply work with, when's your holiday? Please fill it out here. So a lot of information is not being digitized within SMEs because they're focused on selling their business and their products, not on being focused on large tech or information technology supported, let's say, platforms. So all the reasons that we're giving are the wrong ones, right? We should have one focus. And I think that Europe did get it right, but we had one issue. We weren't able to enforce. So the GDPR said we have a red line, right? That means you didn't look, you don't care, you didn't take any mitigating measures. Then we have a really big orange one, from very deep orange to very light orange, that says, you did look, you do give a care, you do care, and you really took mitigating measures, which we cannot objectify, right? But you took care of it, so you're in the orange, but we were never in the green. And this is what we changed with Fair is Fair. You can be in the green because all your interactions, all your data activities leading up to a certain output can be categorized, can be made transparent to those that want to consent. And in some cases, you don't even need to consent. So if I buy a ticket on a mobile application for the bus, right, I don't need to consent. Because if the organization has done its processing correctly, they can only use my information for the bus ticket because it's a contract. I don't have a contract with the application. I have a contract with the bus operator that's actually going to bring me from my origin to my destination. I don't have a relationship with a platform, with people I've never seen. I don't have a relationship with them. You cannot see that. The question is also, do I have a relationship with a monopolist, a real operator? No, I don't. I don't have a choice, so I don't have a relationship. So we need to look at relationships. That's the key, I think, thing that I'm stating here. And within that relationship, what is my identity? Because I'm a completely different human being when I'm paying for something than when I'm actually consuming a glass of beer, for instance, or when I'm sitting on a train.
If I can ask a follow-up question, if and it's to do with data and how long it's held or who holds. Today's Spotify's day for releasing your 12 months of history of what music you watched, right?
Yeah.
In your system, do consumers, is there some process they have of collecting their information for how they've used it over a long period of time? And if so, how does that position your service versus a platform? So that if you were to compile that for them, you must be holding a whole lot of data on them. And so I'm struggling
We're
with
not touching. So thank you for that question. And let's put this straight. We're not touching any data. We're simply managing and communicating the state of play between different specified actors by both transaction parties that are delegated on their behalf. We don't touch anything, right? They interact with one another with the authorities given by the transaction parties to actually open up certain data sets on their behalf. So the data stays at the source. The outcome of the processing can be shared. For instance, if I have a tap in with my card or with a swipe in or do a virtual handshake with a QR code, right? This information can be stored, right? And can be relayed to others. For their convenience, we can do a temporary storage of 48 hours maximum of that information for others to recollect. We cannot access the information because we're not authorized to do so. The information is still need to know, and we, as Fair, don't need to know. We're a service, right? We don't need to know where you used your energy for. We don't need to know who you called. We just will say, hey, we saw that you consumed a series of your minutes that you acquired for a period of time. So the actual information is unknown to us, which is extremely, but important. The other thing is, if I have a fiduciary, right? Imagine that I have a wallet. All these different interactions, all these transactions I go through in life, I can collect them in this wallet. And I can also attribute them or allocate them. For instance, oh, these were the trips I made for my job, or these were the trips I need to share with someone else, or these are this is medical information that I want to share with, let's say, my person that they call in case of an emergency, or these are my medical dossiers that I want to share with cancer research program because it could be beneficial to them. So you still have the ownership of the raw data, your personal data, and of the outcomes of these data activities. And this makes it interesting because you stay in control. And this is also how you generate additional value.
And where does that data sit?
Anywhere you choose. This is, I think, the new role for the real fiduciary roles, like we have a bank, right? I can simply go to the application of my bank and say, hey, oh, good. This is what I spent yesterday, right? And I can even send a reminder to a friend saying, hey, this is what I paid. Shall we split costs? You just have to click this link and select your bank and they'll take care of it. So I think the same thing will work for data. And the four-corner model in banking is the same as we're discussing, because I'm not digital, you're not digital, but thanks to this Zoom program, we are now all in the same room talking about the same thing. I'm talking most of the time.
Very good. So I'm looking for other participants if there's more questions or comments or observations, critiques. I'm interested to ask you about regulation. You've been building this over a period of time when European particular regulation, I'm sure you're working in Europe, European regulation has been developed. How important has it been? What's been its strengths? What's been its weaknesses?
I think, thanks for that question. I think the pure strength of it is, for me, that it relates to my democratic values. So that means that if we handle data correctly or govern it correctly and respect one another, we can create a fair economy around data, but also be fair towards our, let's say, citizens or constituents, or towards our customers, towards our patients. So the democratic value of it is it's sound, right? The philosophy behind it is good, right? So let's create a fair model. And it was actually opposing the centralized monopolist view, right? I actually left startups that I was a part of because investors came in and said, no, we're going to monetize it. We're going to set out barriers. It's all IP related. It's all us, right? Everything needs to revolve around us. We are the network. I went, what the fuck? You couldn't be the network. You're assholes. Sorry for my friend, right? So you just bring in money and you want to multiply that money. You're not contributing value to society. So you're not using information as something that could actually bring prosperity. You're using it to your own extent, to your own benefits. And this is, I think, what we saw in America, that a lot of value, investor value, which is, I think, going up into air, let's be very honest, because most platforms are, besides their marketing value of their ads selling, right, they're not viable. Why not? Because there are too many people working there on creating barriers and, let's say, coding pitfalls for their users, right, on either side. So in the end, I think that, so the philosophy and the democracy are the strengths behind it, right? The weakness, absolute weakness, is the enforcement, right? We had GDPR ever since, I think, 2016, 2018 in power, something like that. Great, right? Yes, let's go for this, right? I was really happy. I know in that time, one of the startups I was working with really hated the GDPR. And I said, why, guys? Think about the future well-being of people. Never let go of that. So we are looking towards the short-term, let's say, return on investment. And I think this is going throughout the market, right? We went from 5-year predicaments to 1 year, now to quarterly, now to monthly, and that it has a huge effect on the market, right? We lost the ability to look towards the future. Where do we want to be in 30 years from now? Where do we want to be in 20 years from now? So what do we have to do now in order to get there? That means that we have to take the unpleasant in order to reach a state in which we can all prosper. And we've lost that completely. The lack of enforcement and the lack of people actually caring, so sending out the right message, I think that's lacking. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this, because I do think that with your digital empowerment, you're focusing on that. And this is what we should focus on, because information management is a tool, right, for prosperity around the globe, not just for a few happy ones that have the ability to invest and to, let's say, take over people's lives.
It's interesting you say that. I, in my previous life, and other people on this call have been involved in government, and the difficult process of getting legislative change, getting things, actually doing enforcement. One of our colleagues, Paul Nemeth, spoke last week, and I know Paul's talked about the difficulties the DPAs have had of just resources, what have you. So a key part of the work done by the whole group of Guide, when we thought through, there's 120, 150 experts on this, about if you're going to have market-based mechanisms, to a degree make them at the person level, at least at the representative level, at the fiduciary level, that you can enforce through contract.
Yep.
So that enforcement is almost a principle of subsidiarity. Bring the enforcement lower down to the people where the actual interaction is taking place. And I think getting the political classes to understand that's actually in their interests, that the enforcement for the citizen takes place closer to the citizen, is actually both an enforcement of rights and a relief of duties on the political superstructure.
I see another question by Dennis, but to add to that, Paul, we actually saw fair is fair from the beginning as a sign for privacy by design. So if you are able as an organization to use that sign because you have taken care of your information management properly, right? I think you can win market, right? I think there are a lot of people out there that are choosing now, let's say, vegetables over proteins, right? Why? Because we're going into a different awareness level. And I think that if you use the right signs, you can also trigger that awareness levels and get people to choose platforms one over the other because they treat you better.
Right.
But Dennis, maybe a last question from you, because I think we're shortly running out of time.
Right.
You're muted, Dennis.
Thank you. Just very quick. And we don't argue that we need regulation in order to enforce laws of crime, property, and contract in order to make markets work in the first place. So nobody says, okay, we should legalize stealing and murder because that just gives people more opportunities. And I think that type of philosophical change, there is enabling regulation and there is regulation of the sorts that the European Union wants to limit. And these two types of regulation haven't been separated. And we'll probably need some terminology to identify the regulations that make markets work. Does that capture what you have in mind in terms of the regulation that's needed in order for your type of business to go ahead?
Yeah, I fully agree with that, Dennis. And I think we're aligned, but it's not just regulation. It's about spearheading change. And I think this is one of the aspects which is really lacking. For instance, also in Europe, we see a lot of projects going on, a lot of concepts emerging, most of which are funded by also the European Commission, but they create noise, right? We need to spearhead the right ideas and go get what we want to get, right? We need to showcase how we can, let's say, in the ticketing market of public transport, leverage compliance and prove its value, and then it will take off. And otherwise, we'll be just talking about here, and over 60 years, people will look back at those videos from the old days going, ha, 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 maybe these guys were right, but we really fucked up. Yes, you did. No worries, but we told you so.
I was about to say to you, how's the business?
Difficult. Yeah. It's primarily privately funded because it's a belief system. And that means that you have to play the long game. And I think that contributing to a society, right, is not something, and sometimes it weighs heavy, Paul, right? I've had moments that I said, why am I doing this? Why am I investing in this? Sitting alone at an airport, waiting for the last flight out, not even to bring you home, but to bring you to your next location, advocating this, getting the support from the public transport community, from the ticketing community even. Yes, I'm not bringing you a popular message, but I'm bringing you the message that needs to be heard because it needs to affect what we all do and not just what we individually want to claim from society.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the major issues that we have. So I even have charters stating how much I can earn and even how much return on investment will be granted for all the investments I made over the past decade. Why? Because if you want to be truthful, you also need to make sure and ensure that you are that. And now I have people watching over my shoulder that simply say, okay, Ferdinand, okay, this is the deal you want to make. This is the deal you make. Good, right? That limits you to a certain degree, but it also grants you the level of, let's say, trust. All right. And this is actually what the European label says towards the rest of the world. You're not just a registered data intermediation service. No, you're recognized under the EU label. And that means that we had to fulfill a lot of these trust aspects, from technical aspects to cost aspects to revenue aspects to all these kinds of aspects. But I like it, right? And I enjoy what I do because it gives me an opportunity to really leave behind a legacy.
That's excellent. And I'd like to say thank you very much for both for contributing today and for what you're doing. I think one of the things that we as a community have been very conscious of is we're strong supporters of the culture which talks about the production of rights and protection of rights, and that I think around the world has happened in different ways, and it's particularly special in Europe and what's been around creation rights. That is not the same thing as creating incentives in the economy for people to deploy capital to go and actually make things happen.
Yep.
And that's a lot of where the guide message others is like, how do you tweak the environment you've created to write those incentives the right way and help create? It's very hard to, as you're doing, trying to start something new and in a well-established network economy. It's one thing to do it in a linear business, but when it's a network business, it's very hard to break in. And so I think, first of all, hats off to you for the courage to do that. But secondly, I think illustrating part of the purpose of our seminar series, and especially the help of my Data Global and the awardees, is to share examples for people of what's necessary to actually build the incentives for people to go and spend their lives being entrepreneurs and putting capital deployed to actually change a new system. And I think that's been very important.
Yeah, people don't buy technology, right? And certainly they don't buy information management. But when they get the rationale behind it, and I know even, right, explaining fair is usually an abstract kind of set. Why? Because we're talking about transactions in a digital world with data processing, right? So a lot of people, it's not their everyday lives. So if you can combine it with examples from, let's say, like I did the car industry or banking or things like that, it starts to help. But we need to get away from this technically engineered society, right? Information is here to serve us and not the other way around. And if I see what currently Europe is doing in view of AI, right? We allocated billions, right? Three fundaments under AI is metadata, right? So you need to organize your data properly. Secondly is the quality of your data. Third one, data governance, right? So why do we invest billions in super factories, right? Instead of focusing on getting the basics right, on top of which we can build these AIs. And the question is, what are we going to do with the AIs? In a world that's screaming sustainability and ecological aspects, we're now setting up computing farms. Let's think before we act, right? So we weren't a ongoing 8-person organization. We were a very limited, stretched for budget, or how do you call it, bootstrapped organization that simply went for iterations of what we learned, did a new iteration together with great people that we had the honor to meet on our path, and to build forth every time new. And we started out with promising tools like blockchain or a distributed ledger. And we had to turn away from that, because if you want to do ticketing in Europe with, let's say, about 300 million transaction in peak hours on the hour, then your blockchain is going to melt.
Yeah, it's not fast enough. That's right.
So you miss your bus. Doesn't really make sense. So we went through all these learnings, but it's interesting. And it's not just about bringing a project or product to life. It's also about the ability to share your experience in these learnings and the know-how and show-how that you produced over these years. And whether Fair ever is going to be a success is very much, I think, dependent on, I think, one of the initial focus markets of ticketing, where I do see some traction going on now, which is promising. And then you can actually start to build a market. And because now we're losing it to the big US-based and Asian-based companies, we are currently pushing credit card payments through the throats of citizens, urging them to take a debt position. Wow, we're really doing the bad things here. And these are the things you tell your children not to do. And we applaud we applaud the bad guys making a lot of money. Oh, you're a drugs dealer. No care, but you're driving a fantastic car. You must be successful. Yes, I'm a very successful drug dealer. Yes, good. Yes. Can I have a picture with your car, please?
We make no statement at all of analogies for people who are in this industry, but I understand what you're saying. Well, listen,
Yep.
thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for presenting. That's very good.
Thank you for having me.
And people who are attending or watching this as a video, we've got communication mechanism. We've got emails and others you can contact with us if you've got questions. Ferdinand, do you want to follow up? You want to find out how you can do this at home? By all means, reach out. Thank you for that. I think, as I said, I think that the key of having practitioners talk about some of the things that we've also talked in policy terms is really important. So thank you to you and thank you to everybody online. See you next time.